an investment in basic science and discovery research is what demarcates outstanding academic institutions. But I think often what hasn't happened as much as maybe it could or should is to make sure that those discoveries rapidly get moved into studies that involve humans so that one can determine quickly whether a discovery is going to have legs with respect to a future new drug or a future new therapy or a future new diagnostic or a future new device. I think it's critically important, actually, because we have such amazing different types of diseases in this institution, and a lot of the progress made at the basic research level depends enormously on having biological samples that one can actually test hypothesis on, disease-specific hypothesis on. I think it's a really critical issue. And unlike adult diseases, of course, pediatric diseases in the whole are quite rare in the general population. And so institutions like this one, I think, have a special need, responsibility to lead the effort in doing this. One of the biggest challenges is, in fact, that our academic centers are basically set up to fundamentally incentivize basic research or clinical care, but they're not really set up to incentivize people that do this middle part that we talk about. By that I mean, if you think about it, the way as a scientist I get promoted at Children's Hospital Harvard Medical School is by the number of papers I produce and the number of grants I get. On the other hand, if I'm a physician who's not doing research but is in the clinic basically taking care of patients, the way I make my living is by the number of patients that I take care of. And so neither of those actually reinforce the process of moving things out of the lab into the patient, because number one, on the one hand, it's very hard to get NIH grants to do that, and number two, it's a very inefficient process, and so the number of patients you actually can take care of and interact with is much lower than if you weren't doing that. So you maybe can see that our system kind of at the current way it's set up doesn't really incentivize this middle part, and there's lots of regulatory complications. There's many things that appear in the laboratory, in preclinical or non-clinical studies, or in mouse studies, in models that appear to be quite like they're going to be very successful, but most of those actually never end up being successful in a patient. So the dropout rate is huge. Children's has invested very much in basic science cores that can be used by many different investigators that are not logical for one lab to have because they're very expensive or they're not used very often. Same way on the clinical side, but there's also a need for those kinds of or similar types of shared services to support these early, very early phase pilot and feasibility or phase 1 studies in human beings. And a complex organization like we have in most academic medical centers are, it is the case that it's often that basic scientists and clinical physician types actually speak different languages, go in different circles, and don't interact a lot. And I think in my experience and that of other people that do this kind of thing, one of the real important things to do to try to stimulate translational research is to build systems by which these two groups of people interact more, so that the basic scientists can understand the questions that are the questions and the opportunities that are present in the clinic, and physicians that are primarily doing clinical work can understand where the basic science is coming from and what's there opportunities there are from the basic science side to be translated into patients. We're going to develop, are in the process of developing a program that basically has 4 major sub-programs. The first part of the program is addressing the issue of not having adequate funds going into this type of research. So there's been an institutional commitment to enough money that we can actually ask for investigators within Children's to apply for pilot grants that are specifically addressing translational issues. The second part of the program is to build this infrastructure of common shared services or cores. The third part of the program is to facilitate interactions between scientists and clinical physician and caregivers to basically do simple things like retreats, where the focus is either many people working on pathways that are affected in different diseases, or one disease with many pathways, and you're trying to build on science and get into the clinic, and therefore you need physicians and scientists to sit together and exchange ideas and develop a plan on how we're going to get from this discovery to first-in-human trial, for instance, or this discovery to a relevant set of preclinical or non-clinical testing that the FDA is going to require before we get to the next step. We're going to develop a translational investigator service where we partner with divisions and departments to identify high-level, outstanding faculty who actually want to serve this niche. And then we will partner with them with respect to helping to pay salary, helping to give them support they need for research, and also to build an educational process that will help them understand all the requirements there are to do early phase human trials or to develop preclinical models of human diseases. Pediatrics is a large portion of the population. Children are a large portion of the population. But if you look across the National Institutes of Health, which has, of course, a nearly $30 billion budget, the percent of the money that's going to support research into children's diseases, childhood diseases, is much smaller than the proportion of children. You know, we think this is actually particularly short-sighted because as the genome gets more and more unraveled, it's clear that we will identify genes that are predicting often susceptibility to diseases that may not appear until adulthood, but we will be able to tell, for instance, that someone has these particular genes early in childhood. And probably even more relevant in some ways, it's clear that things like obesity and diabetes and heart disease, even things like lung cancer from smoking, cardiovascular disease from smoking, all these things often have, if not environmental exposures early in childhood, behaviors early in childhood that lead to the diseases or prevalence of the diseases later on.